So this week, week 6, was about deep and surreal imagery. So first, I'm going to just tell you what a surreal image is and what a deep image is, in case you don't know. So this is from Longman's, I think. A surreal image is something that uses spontaneous or an odd juxtapositions of disparate images, improbable size, color, shape, magnitude, the appearance of images in odd, unreal, or unexpected contexts. So an Ant-Man, for example, the size of a building would be disparate magnitude. The agenda of surrealism is to subjectively portray a quality of mind and aesthetics based on an unconscious association mode of image thinking, and that same one that dreams feature. This, I'm going to come back to this as associative logic in a few minutes. The idea is that there's a separation between your syntactic logic, the logic of a sentence, the logic of logic gates. It's this or that. The logic of dreams is not the same. It's the logic of the body. That's where the surreal and deep images come from. Here's an example. This is from Charles Wright. The poem is Night Dream. Each day is an iceberg, dragging its chill paunch underfoot. Each night is a tree to hang from. The first 3 lines. Obviously, a day is not an iceberg, but the odd juxtaposition of it gives a quality of feeling that we can well understand. It makes of the day something cold, remote, hard, inhuman, not necessarily survivable. It could sink your whole life, etc. The fact that it has a chill punch underfoot, that sense of walking on the dead. Each night is a tree to hang from, straight out of Norse mythology and Odin. A night is not a tree, but that sense of the night and its link to the secrets of the dark. That's clarity. Surrealism is another way of thinking about how things match up and how things go together. The deep image is usually something that is defined as something that fuses the inner and outer states of being, tying them into recognition of an archetypal experience. This is also from Longman's. Enacts an intuitively understood spiritual, emotional, and psychological realm. This is from Charles Simic, a poem called Tragic Architecture. School, prison, trees in the wind. I climbed your gloomy stairs, stood in your farthest corners with my face to the wall. The murderer sat in the front row, a mad little Ophelia, wrote today's date on the blackboard. The executioner was my best friend. He already wore black. Simic and Wright are American surrealists, are often coined as being American surrealism. So surrealism really begins with the French, and we're going to talk about South American surrealism as well, through the lens of Robert Bly. And then there's a kind of intermediary in the developing American surrealism. We have early American surrealists out of the French school in Philippe Lamartine, and we have today people who are trying out different voices really within that sort of big gap between the French and the South American surrealists like Pablo Neruda, for example. Assumptions that underlie this have to, the reason I'm bringing this into it is because in North America, surrealism has taken a place in the mainstream, often not called that. So Wright and Simic are mainstream, extremely good poets who use the power that comes with these kinds of associational logics and odd juxtapositions. It is a very important power, like a battery to charge lines. And even though it's not often associated directly in reviews with surrealism, that is where much of that power has come from, in the use of associational logic to plug in, so to speak, lines and give them an extra boost. What assumptions underlie this is that we know in the West the idea of what the mind is and how it works. I have no idea if that's true or not, but know that the West thinks it knows through Jung and Freud and Adler and a number of other neurological understandings that are coming into being now, as well as psychological ones. We think that there is an unconscious realm and a conscious realm, and that our consciousness is controlled by the syntactic forms of reasoning or logic, and that our unconscious is ordered by associational logic. Our unconscious, depending on who you read, but its site is the body. So the unconscious is the body speaking. There are links between the unconscious and the physical world that are ignored by the conscious mind. So what we would think of as instincts, for example, is a direct link between something that the body has sensed, but it's not conscious in us, but the body knows and gives us usually some kind of emotional direct physical response to tell us something like the chill on the back, the hair standing up on the back of your neck. Your consciousness may not be aware of it, but your body is aware of something. Those links between the unconscious and the physical world are achieved through associational logic. Robert Bly calls associational logic leaping poetry. And the deep or surrealist image can access the unconscious. We also have the assumption that the conscious mind, the syntactic mind, is stultifying and dangerous to our authenticity, that without the unconscious, we are incomplete beings. It's the whole thing behind Jung's individuation, the need to incorporate the unconscious material into the conscious mind and accept even the things we don't like about ourselves, the shadow, for example. That the world of art, its institutions, are largely under the control of the conscious mind, and that hegemony needs to be broken. That was the sort of basic behind, certainly behind Bly, but also behind French Surrealism, the idea that direct access to the unconscious and the oddities that resulted from it was a tool by which we could return human society to authenticity rather than the stultifying institutionalism that the French were worried about, quite rightly, I suppose, since the institution of war had decimated their society. In Robert Bly, he has a book called Leaping Poetry. He talks about something called wild association. And he asks, he prefers the South American surrealists to the French ones, the basis of that being emotion. His take is that the French surrealists did not think that the unconscious had emotion, but just a different kind of logic. And so their take on the world through surrealist poetry was relatively flat emotionally. That is not true with, according to Bly, with people like Pablo Neruda, for example, South American surrealists. His point is that they go into their associations full of emotional energy, whether that be grief or longing or lust or happiness, or ecstasy, and that charge going into association logic amplifies the associations and therefore amplifies the emotionality and potential of the poems to trigger associational leaps in their reader and therefore transformation in the reader. Why am I telling you all this? Well, by learning techniques to identify your own associations, your own leaps, you can amplify your own poetry. So, for example, if you have a poem that feels relatively weak, a verb in it, for example, that is mild, too mild for the subject of the poem, by using what I'm going to tell you about shortly here, associational logic sheets, you can amplify that verb. You can make an unusual or surreal connection that will amplify the metaphorical probabilities or possibilities within the poem. So what I'm going to suggest is that you create your own sheet, your own associational logic sheets. You can have way more than one. All you need is to create a table with 3 columns and say 10 or 12 rows. The first column is nouns. The second column is verbs. The third column is adjectives. And what you're going to do is, in a state of either calm or under the influence of a heightened emotion, whichever you prefer, you're going to list the first 10 or 12, or however many rows you have, nouns that come into your head. It does not matter what they are. It does not matter how they connect at all. On the screen, I'm going to give you examples of one that I have created. Then you're going to clear your mind, do the same thing with the second column or verbs. And then you're going to do the same thing with the third column or adjectives. Once you do that, you can randomly connect. So based on the what's in front of you, what you're looking at, the rebellious coffee mug, the benign tomato, the bleached pumpkin, the trivial foot, the abrupt porch, the misanthropic cuttlefish, the spotted pillow, the benign or the eager cat. It's a pretty standard one. A crumpled coffee mug, a crestfallen pain pill. Each of those are a little bit more outrageous than the last. I like the crumpled pain pill. That's pretty interesting. The woebegone pain pill, the dissonant red-winged blackbird, the hateful bottle of red wine, the hateful lips, the hateful napkin. If you go through the lists randomly and attach words to each other, they suggest completely different lines of thought or content than you would have thought of otherwise. But all the content has come from your mind. This is your list, not mine. So that means that you can use those to generate possibilities, your own prompts, so to speak, to write a poem or at least a line about what it means to be a crestfallen camp chair. Lastly, associational logic. It's that kind of intuitive process of reasoning in which the mind associates one image, event, idea, or word with another. The process can take place through automatic unconscious juxtaposition, like automatic writing, like the mistakes of autocorrect, for example. You have mistakes that sometimes editors make. It can undermine the conventions of culture and universal archetypes. So, for example, the idea of darkness associated with fear. What if it's not associated with fear? What if darkness is trembling ecstasy instead? What does that do to the poem that you're writing? If you want to follow this up and you want to look into the bodily origins of this kind of logic, then I suggest you read a book called Metaphors We Live by Lakoff and Johnson. The details will be in the description below.